It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. Now, you can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. And you can just contact me by emailing oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. We have a returning guest today, Hugh Turley. We've had him on several times before. The first time I met him was about Vince Foster. The man's an expert on Vince Foster. His report on Vince Foster has been included in the official Star report. He's done an investigation into the death of Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton's Betrayers, the case against Abbott, James Fox, and author John Howard Griffin, and a previous book called The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton, an investigation. He's many books about Vince Foster. He's a magician. If your rabbit is missing, it could be in his hat. You can check with him on that, Hugh Turley. He's part of a book called with the Dean. What's his name again? David Martin. I was going to call him Dean Martin. I saw a picture of Dean Martin earlier. David Martin, The Murder of Vince Foster, that book there, The Assassination of James Forrestal. They're part of a website called FBICoverup.com. Mr. Hugh Turley, are you there?
I am here, Ed, and thank you for reminding me that I can find things on Patreon, because I forgot about that. And I can search it, so I'm going to be doing that. Thank you for reminding everybody.
It's so otherwise it's impossible. You can use
I know.
Yeah, Dogpile. You can find it, but Google, forget it, man. It's like I don't exist on there.
Right.
Remind the audience, though.
And plus, we also support the Ed Opperman Show. We subscribe at Patreon. Very important to do that.
Let me tell you guys, Hugh Turley is a great friend of the show, and he's a great friend to me. He's been very good to me over the years, and he's been helping me book guests more recently, too. But you, remind the audience about yourself. Who is Hugh Turley?
Ed, I'm a professional magician and entertainer, and I've been living in the Washington, D.C. area. I call it the Logic Free Zone for over 50 years. And I have performed everywhere in this town, all the embassies. I used to go to the White House, but I think I've been banned from there. Some of the things I've investigated ruffled the feathers of the FBI and the Justice Department and the news media here. But I used to rub shoulders with the big shots in town. They didn't want to shake my hand. So that's what I have. I made a living in the deception business. But the knowing magic, I mean, people think it's just entertainment, but there's a common thread in all magic tricks. There's one thing they all have in common, every trick, and that is a lie. There's a lie in every magic trick. And just like in humor, and I don't know if people don't know this either because I do comedy, but there's always an element of truth in every thing that's funny. If you find a joke or something, there'd be some truth in it. So it's just a universal thing. But I have been good at spotting lies because I do it professionally. I do it for fun and for comedy, but I am good at recognizing things that aren't quite right, and that's how I got into the story we're going to talk about today.
Which is the death of Ernest Hemingway. We were talking off the air, and I said I was down at the Hemingway House in Key West, Florida, which I recommend everybody go visit the museum down there. It's a beautiful tour. You see those six-toed cats all over the place. And there was a fellow taking a tour who was writing a book, and he says, Hemingway's suicide was driven by Hoover. Hoover drove him to commit suicide. And I says, what? I Googled it. There's a book about it, too. And I mentioned it to you, and the first thing out of your mouth is, hey, Ed, you know they chopped up that shotgun and they cut it into pieces? He says, what?
Yeah, well, yeah, what?
What do you got on Hemingway, my friend?
Well, I got a couple of things. Since you mentioned the tour in Florida, I have to add this to your listeners and yourself. In preparing for this show, I was looking for some things I'd found before online, and I found that there's a virtual tour of the Hemingway house in Idaho.
Ooh.
It's on YouTube, and you can find it. It's just about 15 or 20 minutes, but you can see the whole house, and they walk you through. And since we're going to discuss the house where he died today, after the show, people want to go on YouTube and look up the virtual tour of the Hemingway house in near Ketchum, Idaho. They can take a look at that house.
So how'd you get started on this Hemingway conspiracy?
Okay, well, I got started on this because I was listening to C-SPAN radio. They used to have a program like, I think it was called Book Notes or something. They had a thing about American authors, and they were talking about Hemingway, and I used to listen to the radio in the background. And there was a woman on there named Susan Beagle. She's a Hemingway scholar, and I've emailed her just recently, so she's still around. She's a college professor, but she's an expert on Hemingway. And she was being interviewed on this program, and at some point someone asked her about the shotgun that Hemingway was killed with. And she said that it had been cut up and buried. And I was like, what did you say? Wait a minute. Why would somebody do that? And I'm trying to picture in my mind, were you using a hacksaw? I mean, how do you do that? And why would you do that? So after the program was over, I tracked her down. I asked her, can you tell me about this gun being cut up? And she said, I can't remember where I read that. But she said, I know it's in the literature. She said, I know I read that, and I'm sure it's there. But she said, I just can't remember who wrote it. Because she probably read a lot of Hemingway books and books about Hemingway. So anyway, I went up to the University of Maryland, which I'm not too far from, and I went to the McKeldin Library there, and they had a whole section of Hemingway books. It must have been from the top of the shelf all the way down to the floor, about 5 or 6 feet across, and I went through every book. I picked up every one of them, opened it up, looked in the back, see if there's anything about his death, and I found what I was looking for. But it's not where you might think it would be, because it's not in the body of the book. It's in a book by Carlos Baker called Ernest Hemingway, A Life Story. And in this book, in the back, in the endnotes, and a lot of people don't read endnotes and footnotes, but I do. And it's important to do this because sometimes authors will put things in a footnote or endnote that's not really true.
Right.
And that'll be their source. And I went to the archives once just to find some documents that were in a footnote, and the guy said, I know what you're looking for, and it's not here. So that was in the Pearl Harbor book that somebody had documented some documents in, but they weren't there. So I always look at the footnotes and endnotes. And in my books that I've written with David Martin, we always, and same with John and Patrick, John Clark and Patrick Noll, we always have very good footnotes and endnotes. Our sources are top, So so I look at other people's footnotes. Yeah. Well, Carlos Baker has a footnote at the very end of here, and it's just called postmortem, and it's almost a paragraph long. But I'll just read a part of it to you here. It says in this footnote, Mary Hemingway and Chuck Atkinson were anxious that the gun not fall into the hands of souvenir hunters. Chuck cut the gun up into pieces with a blowtorch and buried them in a secret place. Well, that's the source for the gun being cut up and buried. And I think it's probably pretty good because the author, Carlos Baker, he was a friend of Hemingway's. He personally interviewed Chuck Atkinson on August 2nd, 1964. He also interviewed Mary Hemingway in August of 64, and also Don Anderson, who was around that time when this incident happened. So he got the right from these people. But that was the story. Was why it was cut up with a torch. But that got me started because I thought that doesn't make sense to me. And then I wanted to know more about his death. So I started.
Wait, can I ask a quick question? Now, was this cut
sure.
up? I'm assuming there had to be some kind of investigation in forensics and ballistics. Was it cut up after it was returned from the police department, or was it never seized by the police department, taken into evidence?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's an excellent question because it actually, in police work, a weapon like that should have been taken by the police and kept for at least a year. That's standard procedure, police procedure, because you don't know if something's going to come up in another couple of weeks or a month later. Something's going to come up that, maybe this wasn't what we thought it was, and we have to do a further investigation. And there should have been some forensics done on the gun because when you shoot a gun at yourself in suicide, for example, the gun is usually close to the person's head, and it draws blood back into the gun. I learned this when we investigated the Foster death, and there's a vacuum, and there would be a lot of blood on the gun. There should have been a lot of blood on the gun if it was fired at close range. But if that's not, there's no police reports, so we don't know if there was blood on the gun. But to answer your question, it was returned by the police to Atkinson and Mary Hemingway 2 weeks after the death. Just 2 weeks.
And what year was this?
Rather soon.
What year was this?
1961.
61. Yeah.
Yeah.
Things were loosey-goosey back in
those
days, yeah.
Well, they're really loose when they're covered up in murder. It gets a lot looser, my friend.
Yeah.
Let me just say, one of the things I do when I do this kind of research is, because you have to go back. I learned this from John Clark, Patrick Knowlton's attorney. You have to go back to the beginning, and try to get the information that was first available. What happens at the what was the first story out? So right out of the gate, there's the story from the UPI that was published in the Madison State Journal. It says this. This is the headline was Hemingway dies in gun accident. Okay, that's the headline. But then there's a subheadline, which is contradictory because it says famed author takes his own life at Sun Valley. Oh, wait a minute. One headline says it's an accident. The next headline says he took his own life. Can't be both. Okay, one is called suicide. The other one's called an accident. There's only 4 ways we die: murder, suicide, accident, and natural cause. So he's got 2 causes of death in this headline right out of the gate. The Baltimore Sun published it this way. They said, wife believes writer's death accident. Officials see no evidence it was otherwise. So here it's an accident in the Baltimore Sun. The Washington Post first story came out this way. Authorities to let people judge Hemingway case. How's that? Let the people decide.
Let's take a vote. Let's take a vote.
Exactly. That's the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Now, about a week later, on July 9th, the New York Times published a story because they interviewed Mary Hemingway, the widow, on July 8th. But she only interviewed him on this condition. She would talk to 4 reporters if they submitted their questions in advance. And she changed her story because originally she said he'd been cleaning his gun and accidentally killed himself. But now she said he was only looking at it when it discharged. Of course, she's not in the room. She's sleeping upstairs. Anyway, she also said this in the New York Times story, and this is really significant, I think, because it's an early story. Because later the story becomes suicide. He was depressed. But in the New York Times on July 9th, when she was interviewed on July 8th, she said that she was convinced that he was not despondent and it was an accident. It's pretty interesting. Because later she would...
You know what's interesting too, because with the overdose of Margot Hemingway too, it was the same kind of situation. First of all, it was an accident, then it was suicide, then the family was denying it was suicide. Same kind of situation there.
Right, there's something wrong with it. You know, I got a book. Maybe you're familiar with it because you're an investigator, but there was a book. It's used by police academies. It's used by the FBI Academy at Quantico. I first encountered this book when I was looking into Foster's death with Patrick Knowlton, his attorney. It's by Vernon J. Gebert. It's called The Practical Homicide Investigation. This book is 3 inches thick. It's huge, and it's used to train people to do homicide investigations. And in this book, the latest edition came out in 2015, and Gebert added a new section here. He calls it the staged scene. And Gebert says when a scene is ambiguous, and it, like in the case of Thomas Merton, they said it was an accident or it was natural cause. It's either one or the other, and it's sort of unclear. He said that Gebert says that's a sign that something's wrong, and it's a staged scene. And this is what we have in Hemingway's case, because initially it was called an accident or accident/suicide. We don't know. We'll let the people decide. So when you have a case that's ambiguous, according to Gebert, that's a red flag. It's got to be one of 4 causes: natural cause, suicide, homicide, or accident. If you've got 2 of them at the same time, Gebert says, look out. You better take a careful look at this because there's something not right. It can't be 2 causes of death. So that was coming out of the gate. Now, Mary Hemingway, the widow, wrote a book in 1977 where she said that she did not tell the truth in the beginning when she said it was an accident. Well, wait a minute. Now she's changing her story. Well, that's not good either. And she really, frankly, she should have been a suspect because she's in the house at the time someone dies violently from a gunshot. She's a spouse. This is someone that police need to talk to. Usually when there's a death of a family member, the police go to make notification. Of course, she's already there, but they want to talk to the family. They want to interview them. Well, she wasn't available for interview because she left the house immediately, and she went to see their friend that I mentioned earlier that cut up the gun, Chet Atkinson, and they took her to the doctor where she got some sedatives, and then she went and stayed at his house, and she didn't talk to the police until the following day. And even then, her statement to the police came through Atkinson. He delivered her statement to the police. Well, see, the police need to talk to her. And she should have been a suspect because she's a beneficiary of the estate. She's going to get all the royalties and inherit everything. So, they need to talk to her.
But, you Charlie, let me ask you a quick question, though. This little town in Idaho where this happened, like how large was the police force in 1961? Like a couple of sheriffs?
It's small.
Yeah.
It's small.
Yeah.
It's the sheriff that came out.
Yeah, one or two guys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But even so, I mean, you have to, like, there should have been crime scene photographs. Another thing a crime scene will tell you, and this is important because I didn't tell you where he died, but he died in the foyer of the home. Now, a foyer is the entranceway, right?
Yeah.
That's where you come into the home. It's 5 feet by 7 feet. It's a small area. It's not really a room. It's the foyer. It's where you take off your boots. But I would really want to know, and the police should have wanted to know, which direction was the gun fired? I mean, was it from the doorway into the house? Did he open the door? Because the time now is like 7 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. And why would you go to the foyer at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, except perhaps to open the door if someone's knocking at the door?
Right. It wouldn't be a location for a suicide or a gun cleaning location.
Yeah, it's a strange place for the.
Yeah.
So it's but the blood evidence, the blood spatters and so on, and the shot from the shotgun, it's going to be a mess on the wall somewhere. Or if it's on the ceiling, that might indicate he was shot from below. Everything went up, but. Where is the mess, is important because that's going to tell you something. But see, we don't have any of that because they didn't take any crime scene photographs and they didn't write a report. There's no report. And there was no inquest. The coroner said, well, we don't need an inquest. Frankly, what they said was that Mrs. Hemingway said it was an accident. We're going to go with that. That's what they said. And that's strange. Let me tell you a little bit about the timeline, though, because I need to sort of tell you what's going on here, how this happened. Because Hemingway was he was quite a character, but he was under surveillance from the FBI.
Right.
Okay. From the 1940s, and if people want to look online, there's a place called the Vault, and then FBI reports. You can Google that and find it. But they have these. It's like public domain now. These FBI reports of famous people, and Hemingway's is up there. For what it is that they release. They don't always release everything, but what they did release is up there, and it's about 120 pages. And it does, if you know how to look at these documents, you can find some little things in there, that are maybe they forgot to redact or they didn't mean to release. But then things change over time. You find out other stuff that makes pieces of the puzzle snap together. But this FBI report of his shows that he was under surveillance from the 1940s. And Hoover was very jealous of Ernest Hemingway because Hemingway was working with the State Department during World War II. He had his boat down in Cuba there, and he would go out like he's fishing, but he was looking for German U-boats. And he had a gang down there in Cuba called the Crook Factory. And there's like a little espionage club of his, and Hemingway did not like anybody doing the spying except himself. He didn't like the competition, so he kept an eye on Hemingway. And when Hemingway, just before he died, he went to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. His doctor, George Sievers in Idaho, suggested he go there to be treated for high blood pressure. And Dr. Butt at the clinic and Dr. Sievers both said that he went there for blood pressure and diabetes and not for any mental illness. But see, as the years went by after Hemingway's death, people said, oh, yeah, he was crazy. Well, his wife and his supposed good friend, A.E. Hotchner, who I don't really trust, he was another Hemingway biographer and a guy who knew Hemingway. They said Hemingway was crazy and was paranoid and all this stuff. But see, he knew he was being followed by the FBI, And there was a doctor at the Mayo Clinic who did psychiatry. His name was Dr. Howard Rome. And this guy's actually in the Warren Commission report because he did a psychological autopsy of Lee Harvey Oswald. Of course, he never met Lee Harvey Oswald, but this guy, he can analyze somebody after they're dead that he never met. And he said that Lee Harvey Oswald, he told the Warren Commission that he was a very poor reader in school, and he had trouble with reading, so he had a low self-esteem, so he wanted to kill John F. Kennedy to make everybody see that he's really an important person. And it's just ridiculous.
Well, anyway, at least he didn't say that was a suicide, too, okay?
No, but Rome was... I mean, this guy is, he's working with the feds on covering up the JFK assassination and blaming Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, when Hemingway was at the Mayo Clinic, Rome was an informant for the FBI and keeping the FBI office in Minneapolis informed of what's going on with Hemingway at the clinic. Well, anyway, Hemingway gets released, and he goes back to Ketchum, Idaho, with his wife, Mary, and he went back by car, and he had a sparring partner, because Hemingway liked to box. He had a sparring partner named George Brown, and Brown drove the car. So the three of them went back. Hemingway sat in the front seat with Brown. Mary was in the back seat, and they drove, I think it took 5 days. They left around the end of June to get back to Idaho. And once they arrived, they went out to dinner. This is the night before he dies. And this passage is from, when I learned this from Mary Hemingway's book, and this really, really rings true with me. Let me tell you what she said. She said that they went to this restaurant. It's called Christiania. Anyway, at Christiania restaurant, it's across the street from Chet Atkinson's motel, and he had like a little shopping center, strip shopping center there. He's the neighbor that buried the gun. So they're across the street at the Christiania restaurant in Ketchum, Idaho, and Mary wrote that they wedged into a small far corner table. Okay? And this is, I know why you sit in the corner table of a restaurant.
And it's the gangster seat.
I did this with Patrick Norton. Pardon me?
The gangster seat.
Exactly. Exactly. It's the Hemingway, and I did this with Patrick Knowlton and John Clark because we were tailed by the FBI. And they used to, when they follow you, it's what they call overt surveillance. They want you to know that you're being followed. So you see these agents, and they're doing it to spook you. Well, if Hemingway's sitting in that far inside corner seat, I know what he's looking for, right? I thought, this isn't good. So anyhow, she said in her book that when they were sitting there, Ernest asked the waitress, Susie, the regular waitress, who these guys were that just came in, because it's a Saturday night and it's late, and two guys come in, and he said, "Who are they?" And she said, I think they're probably just a couple of salesmen from Twin Falls. And Ernest Hemingway muttered, "Like hell they are. If they were salesmen, they'd be home." He said, "They're the FBI." Now this guy he's nobody's fool, okay? And I think he was right on the money, because he was, you can see his FBI file. They're following him all the time, right? Dr. Howard Rome is reporting on him. So, he can spot the agents when they come in, and that's why he's sitting in the corner table.
Especially a small town like that, yeah. New faces, yeah.
Oh, yeah. They're not there she's the waitress.
Yeah.
They're not salesmen on a Saturday night. They're not out on the road. They're home. And Hemingway knew that. So, of course, the next morning, that's Saturday night, the next morning, he's shot at 7 a.m.
Oh, really?
So I have to wonder where are these FBI agents the next morning, I'm wondering, right? And of course, one of the things the FBI liked to do was to intimidate people and to blackmail people. And if that doesn't work, they'll kill you. They kill Martin Luther King. They'll kill people.
Yeah, they were trying to drive a king to suicide too. They try and drive you to suicide too. And if that doesn't work, then
this is what they tried to do with Patrick Knowlton. They tried to make Patrick Knowlton paranoid, and because they were following him around all the time. And even when he wasn't being followed, if somebody stared at him, he thought they were following him. It was really cruel. But this is a technique that's done Now, I found in these documents, I found a year and a half before Hemingway was shot, the U.S. State Department memo was written that said it's unfortunate that a person of his position and reputation should publicly take a position that displays strong criticism of his government and compatriots. Well, see, he was a dissident. And, if you're a dissident in our country, a lot of people don't realize this, you can get yourself targeted by these alphabet agencies. So they listed him, the FBI listed him as a subversive, and some officials considered him an enemy of the state. Now, these officials would be willing to collaborate with Hemingway's, widow to cover up a murder because, journalists would cover it up, but his widow was a journalist. Mary Hemingway was a journalist. Mm. And you really can't trust this woman because she and Hemingway were both married when they started dating and ended up getting married. So, they're not trustworthy people here.
Yeah, Hemingway was married 4 times, yeah.
4 times, yeah. But, there's not a shred of credible evidence to suggest that he killed himself. There just isn't any evidence of that. So the first, one of the UPI stories that first came out, the first official statement from the coroner said that he died at 7:30 at his home. His wife thinks it was accidental while cleaning his gun. So that's the first story. And then the UPI reported that the officials did not see any gun cleaning equipment in the room. Well, there wouldn't be any in the foyer anyway. But the following day, the United Press International asked McGoldrick, this guy's the coroner, they asked him if the self-inflicted gunshot wound was, did he kill himself or was it an accident? And this is what he said. This is a direct quote from the coroner. He said, "I wasn't there, so I don't know. Maybe the truth will never be known. No one saw it. The family's willing to let it go that way, and that's all right with me. The wife thinks it was an accident." So see, right out of the gate, this thing was an accident. It was not a suicide initially. Initially, it was an accident. But over time, it changed. And I told you about that New York Times story that was on July 9th. Well, later, Time magazine would change the story and say that the death was not an accident. This is July 14th, so this would be almost 2 weeks after the death. The Time magazine, usually the magazines, the newspapers came out daily, but the magazines would come out
monthly.
Monthly or weekly. I think Time magazine was a weekly. Mm. But on July 14th, they have more time to gather the story, more time to get the evidence. So Time magazine wrote a story on July 14th that said that the death was not an accident, but a suicide.
Well, okay, let me ask you this, Turley. What was the new information they got? Who were they talking to?
They didn't have any new. Yeah. They didn't have any. Yeah. This is what Time magazine said. They reported in Time magazine that Mary Hemingway insisted in July 14th issue that it was an accident. But Time magazine said, and they put this in quotes, I'm quoting Time magazine, they said plainly it could not have been. See, people didn't think he could have accidentally killed himself because the guy was very familiar with guns.
Right.
He was a hunter. He used all kinds of firearms. And by the way, this gun that he was shot with was a Boss. It's called BOSS shotgun, and they're made in England. And this was a custom-made gun for Hemingway that was silver inlaid with real silver. This is a very valuable piece. It's worth tens of thousands of dollars. You don't cut it up and bury it. Okay?
Let me ask you this. Did you look into any statistics? Because I know if you're cleaning a weapon, an accidental discharge may be common. But how many of those accidental discharges result in a death? I would assume.
I don't know.
I would assume very, very low, especially with a shotgun. Because when you're cleaning, you got that long rod. You're pumping it up and down with little cloths and stuff like that, little brush. You're spraying and stuff.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So if it goes off, you got a rod in there. You know what I mean? What else are you cleaning on this thing? That trigger?
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's just not believable to me. It started for me with the gun being cut up and buried, but then, if you start to read the later materials, the further you get away from the death. Now, initially it's an accident. And the coroner said, we're going to go with that because that's what the wife said, so we're going with that. Well, that didn't last too long. It changed. And then once the suicide story started to take root, then everybody said, oh, he was depressed. Oh, my gosh, he was so depressed. And everybody's saying he's depressed. And see, Hotchner and the widow, when they wrote their books later, they would say that he thought he was being followed by the FBI. Well, guess what? He was. Because, see, when they wrote their books, these FBI documents had not been released. Now, the other thing is the little twist on the FBI that got me. I wrote an article about this death I first researched it in 2002, but I didn't really write anything about it until 2009. And I wrote that for our little community paper, but they always limited me to 500 words, so it was a pretty short article. But what brought it back up to me in 2009 was a book that came out by three guys. It was titled "The Rise and Fall of the KGB in America." And it was by three authors, and a guy named Haynes, Klur, and Vasiliev. And their book was based on newly released KGB documents. And this is kind of interesting. This is stuff nobody knew before. But, of course, probably J. Edgar Hoover knew, but if anybody knew, he would know, or the CIA would know. But anyway, these newly released KGB documents revealed that Hemingway had made some overtures to the KGB that he would be willing to help work with them, and they even gave him a code name. I don't know what the code name was. He had a name, Argo, A-R-G-O. That was going to be his KGB code name, but he never really did anything for the KGB. The KGB said, no, nothing ever came of it. We never found any use for the guy, so we never used him. But
well, real quick,
he had a contact.
Where did you get that information, though, from with the KGB?
It's from this book. The book is called "The Rise and Fall of the KGB in America" by Haynes, Klur, and Vasiliev.
Gotcha. And they conclude that
you can find this. If you look up my name on the internet, Hugh Turley and Hemingway,
right,
this article will come up. It's at Dave Martin's website.
Gotcha.
He's got the article up there. But you can find, and you'll see references to this book. So the KGB connection kind of interested me because I thought, well, this would be a reason why the FBI might be following him. This would be, maybe they were KGB agents, or maybe they were CIA agents. I mean, I don't know who's following him the night before he's shot, but it could have been any one of these agencies, Who knows? But it just added a little something that got me back interested in it again was the KGB angle of it, because I never knew about that until 2009. But that sort of resurrected the story for me again. And then I heard something. I'm always learning. Mark Twain had an expression that he said, we're always improving the quality of our ignorance, right?
That's a good.
And I am doing that. I'm telling you. So I just found out when I started looking into Hemingway again that he was a Catholic guy. Did you know he was Catholic?
I would assume. In Spain,
Well, he was baptized. He was actually raised in a church this Christian church I think the name of it, which denomination it was. It was a denominational church outside of Chicago. But he was baptized during World War I when he was injured by a priest. And then I started to look into his Catholic connection because I stumbled on this, and this is kind of interesting because we're coming up on the Easter season and Passover and Good Friday. And Hemingway actually wrote a 4-page play about the crucifixion of Christ. This is pretty much unknown. My brother was an English major, and I told him about it. He said, wow, I never heard of that. Well, the title of it is Today is Friday, okay? And I thought it was interesting that Hemingway wrote a play about the crucifixion of Christ. And it's the setting of the story is 3 Roman soldiers are going into a bar after the crucifixion, and they're going to have a couple of drinks and talk about the day. And the bartender is a Hebrew guy named, they call him George. That's Hemingway's style. But the title of the play is Today is Friday. And I don't think Hemingway would have written this if he didn't have some Christianity in his blood. He was also close to John F. Kennedy. Kennedy, by the way, quoted Hemingway in the first sentence of his book, Profiles in Courage. He quoted Hemingway, who said that courage is grace under pressure. And John F. Kennedy sent Ernest Hemingway a personal invitation to his inauguration. They were good friends, and they corresponded. In fact, all of Hemingway's papers are at the John F. Kennedy Library in Massachusetts, in the Presidential Library. That's where Hemingway's papers are. So anyway, Hemingway's second wife was very Catholic, and I think it was through her that he became more Catholic. They said he often went into churches and would light candles and pray. And in this play that he wrote, these soldiers are talking about, this guy on the cross. The first guy says, well, he's pretty good up there. I thought he was, we've seen a lot of these guys, and this guy was pretty good. It's like he was a prize fighter or a bullfighter or something. But there's three characters. But the one soldier, the first soldier, is the one. At one point, he says, "Did you see me slip the old spear into him?" And the second soldier says, "You're going to get into trouble someday doing that." And the first soldier said, "It was the least I could do for him. I tell you, he looked pretty good up there to me today." Well, I didn't know this, but one thing leads to another. The soldier that stuck the spear in the side of Christ ended up converting to become a Catholic.
That's right. Yeah.
And he's a saint. And there's a statue of him at St. Peter's in Rome. Longinus, I think his name is. He's a Roman soldier. So anyway, that's just a little sidelight. But the reason I bring up the Catholic angle of this is that I just looked at a book about Hemingway's Catholic influences by Matthew Nichol. And Nichol's kind of going with the suicide story, but Nichol argues that Hemingway wasn't really Catholic because Catholics don't approve of suicide. He didn't think Hemingway would kill himself if he was Catholic. So he's arguing that he's not a Catholic because he committed suicide. But see, Nichol is going with the suicide. But see, you could turn that argument the other way around and say, well, maybe Hemingway didn't commit suicide because he was influenced by the Catholic faith. So that would be an argument the other way. You can argue it either way if you want.
But then you Turley, let me ask you this, okay? The death takes place in his own house, in his own doorway, with his own gun. Now, the wife, Mary Hemingway, she would have to know if there was a knock on the door, the doorbell rang, someone's at the door and shows up at the door. And then they would have to somehow obtain his weapon from him and use it on him. But are there conclusive ballistics that that's the weapon that was used?
Well, let me tell you what else I know about the weapon. Because we might as well get it all up on the table here. Because there was no ballistics investigation or stuff about the weapon. And I told you they didn't say whether there was blood on it or not.
Right.
But, see, when Mary Hemingway, she said she was awakened by two banging sounds. So that's two shots.
Yeah.
Two. And if you're firing a double-barrel shotgun at your head, you don't get two shots. You get one. So that I found interesting that she said there were two shots.
I've looked this up. About 4% of gunshot suicides are two shots. So it's not that.
All right.
It's not that uncommon.
Well, with a shotgun to the head?
Well, no, I'm just saying gunshots. Don't quote me on shotguns to the head. I don't know.
Okay, well, I can see maybe if you had a 22 to the head,
and also
38 maybe. But
I've had guns too that I had this the Tonix Pocket 9. You'd pull the trigger and the recoil from the gun, it would fire twice. The trigger pull would fire twice.
Well, I'm not an expert on that, but I did. But anyway, she called, the first person she calls.
Right.
Is Chuck Atkinson. And then I think he must have called the doctor police. I don't really know who called the police. But the other neighbor, she was this guy, Atkinson ran the motel shopping center, but another guy was like a fitness instructor at Sun Valley Lodge, a sports instructor. His name was Don Anderson. And he's another friend of the family. Now, when he reached the house, and this is in Carlos Baker's book, he said the suicide weapon was still there, and he picked it up and opened it up and looked, and he said that there were two shots fired.
Okay.
Well, see, this guy is not supposed to pick up a weapon at a crime scene. I mean, he's just disturbed the crime scene, okay? That's a big no-no. If you ever come up on a crime scene, you don't touch anything. But he did, and I found that interesting. And he said both shots were fired. Now, there's other reports that only one shot was fired. So there's a contradiction.
You want to know what you mean? This is where we get to the importance of this gun was chopped up with a blowtorch. Because if my theory about the hair trigger, because it was a custom made gun, right? We could test that now. You know what I mean? You can even test it for blood residue 20 years, 50 years later.
Yes, you could. Yeah. But it was cut up and it said secretly buried. So, I mean, you're destroying evidence, is my opinion, and that's to me is a reason to be suspicious. Now, Hemingway could very well have committed suicide. I don't know. Yeah. I'm not saying he was murdered for sure, but I would say there's reason to have some doubts, just because of the way the whole thing is handled. See, and I'm not convinced that he took his own life. No, here you got a guy under FBI surveillance and FBI COINTELPRO type harassment, and suddenly he's dead. You got the weapons destroyed. Now, what about Mary Hemingway? Does she have a motive in all this? Oh yeah, and well, that your question about Mary Hemingway brings back the other question I wanted to ask you, because in your previous question I didn't really get to it, but you said, how would they get his gun to shoot him, right?
Yeah, right.
That's a good question. And now you bring up Mary Hemingway. Well, I told you she should have been a suspect because she stood to benefit big time from his death. And of his 4 marriages, hers was the longest. So it would pass the expiration date. It may have been just about over anyway. Yeah. And they weren't sleeping in the same bedroom. They had separate bedrooms. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, when he got up and went downstairs, to get to the door, and then, you got to believe her story. Well, I was awakened by the shot. She may have been awake and heard him go downstairs with someone. She may have heard the knock on the door, but she knew who it was because she gave them the gun earlier, So she may have provided the gun to the killers. We don't know. You know what else, too, man? Even should have been a suspect, okay?
Yeah, even a sheriff, in a small one-pony town could pick up a recently fired shotgun and tell you if it was just cleaned that day or it was in the process of being cleaned. That anybody could see that. You could smell the oil on it and stuff like that. You'd see the cleaning tools around. Right, but see, these conclusions that are reached, like accident or suicide, they don't have any evidence for that. You have to have, where does the evidence, like I said earlier, the direction of the shot, was it fired from the doorway or was it toward the doorway? I mean, was there blood on the door? I mean, was the door open when they came? I mean, when they found the body, was the door open or was it closed? I mean, I don't know. There's just so many unanswered questions. But see, when you don't do a proper investigation, the Practical Guide for Homicide Investigation by Geberth says that every scene should be treated as a homicide until homicide can be ruled out. Okay, that's standard police procedure. That's in the homicide textbook of tactics and procedures for forensic techniques. This place should have been treated as a crime scene from the very beginning until it could be ruled out. But it was just an accident. And it was an accident because she said it was an accident. Well, she'd already left the scene, and you're getting a hearsay from her friend who's telling you that, well, she said it was an accident. Well, there's something wrong here. There's just not. And, of course, our news media has covered up the truth about a lot of crimes, especially if the crime is committed by the state, and the state has got this guy under, and the surveillance of Hemingway by the FBI is illegal. This is an illegal surveillance of a man for decades, that's unwarranted. I mean, it's illegal. So they're doing illegal stuff to the guy already. They would be suspects. Yeah, and of course, in a country like we live in, you can get away with that. They harassed and intimidated Patrick Knowlton, who was a grand jury witness in Washington, D.C. in broad daylight. He was set to testify about the death of Vincent Foster and tell everybody that his car was not at the scene where he allegedly drove and killed himself. I mean, you got witness intimidation in this town of Washington, D.C., and the guy that was in charge of it is Brett Kavanaugh. He's now in the Supreme Court. I was just going to say that, I was just going to say that. This is why when I look at this thing, I'm thinking, okay, I've seen this before, okay? I've seen the FBI follow people before. I've seen the intimidation before. I've seen them cover up a murder before.
there's no reason not to believe that this could also be a murder. There's no evidence that proves to us that this guy killed himself. So, and there's all the stuff about depression came later. Mm-hmm. And his own doctor, Dr. George Sievers, and the doctor at the Mayo Clinic said there was no mental illness. So, and they were the last doctors to see him. So that's their story.
Yeah, then they bring up the alcoholism and head injuries from boxing and other plane crashes and things.
Oh, yeah. Well, once they've got the suicide conclusion, they work backwards. And they say, well, he wasn't really a Catholic because he killed himself. And he killed himself, it goes from there. That's how it works.
And 61 was before all the other assassinations, right? Like people wouldn't be jumping up and saying, this guy, we had FBI, we had FBI bugs. Look, here's a bug right here in my hand. It was before all that. Malcolm and...
Yes, it was. Well, that's also interesting because, maybe they were getting the ducks in a row for killing John F. Kennedy. Because, if Hemingway had been alive when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, this is a guy who would not have kept his mouth shut.
All right.
He would have been speaking up right away. And he was a dangerous man like Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and John F. Kennedy, because this is a guy who has courage, okay? And he is not afraid to speak his mind. And as Kennedy said, he has grace under pressure. That's a quote from Hemingway in Profiles in Courage. And this guy, like Thomas Merton, he had an audience. I mean, when Hemingway spoke, people listened. People knew him. He was a famous author, so he had a platform. Now, you could say something or I could say something, but nobody, you don't have the audience of Ernest Hemingway or Thomas Merton.
Not yet. I'm working on it.
So we're working on it. I mean, there's a famous quote from Paul Goodman. He said, in America, you can say anything you want as long as it has no effect. But see, Hemingway was a guy who had an effect. And I think this was also around the time of the Bay of Pigs fiasco. And he had connections to Cuba, and he had friends in Cuba. And I don't think he was going to be sit quiet about that either. That was something that
at the time. Did anybody raise suspicions at the time
of Hemingway's death?
Yeah.
No,
not even a peep.
No. Everybody, we believed what the newspaper said. I mean, even if they said something as ridiculous as the Washington Post said, well, what did the headline say? Authorities will let the people judge Hemingway case. They actually published that. Let the public decide if it was accident or suicide. Well, that's not how it's supposed to be done. And they come up with these conclusions of a suicide or an accident, and they don't have to provide any evidence. I mean, the news media says this is what happened, and that's it. And most Americans trust, at least in those days, they trusted the press. That, if there was something wrong, they'd tell us. Well, I think most people are getting wise to that. If there's something wrong, they're not telling.
Yeah, you think so? I don't even know about that anymore. But listen, we only got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything else that you'd like to throw in here with this Hemingway? Yeah, it's kind of depressing, man, to think that they killed Hemingway. Yeah.
Well, but something. I told a friend of mine once. He was a good friend too. This is my friend Pierre. I said to him, Pierre, I said, the truth is very disturbing. And he said, yes, it is, Hugh, but he said, it's liberating. It's liberating. I think that's the important thing. That's why the truth is so important to me. It is liberating. So I'd rather know the truth than to be ignorant. And that's why I wrote these books with Martin, the martyrdom of Thomas Merton, an investigation. And we wrote a second one, Thomas Merton's Betrayers, the case against Abbott James Fox and author John Howard Griffin. And that's why Patrick Knowlton and I worked with John Clark and tried to get the truth out about, the FBI cover-up in our own country. And our website is FBIcoverup.com. There's a hyphen between cover and up hyphen. But it's liberating to know the truth. And see, if I hadn't done my research on these other cases, the things that are wrong with this case wouldn't pop up to me. I wouldn't recognize all of the things that are wrong here. And do you have this book by Vernon Gebhardt, Practical Homicide Investigation?
No, I do not. No, I was never really never really much homicide work in my career.
It's pretty. Well, I'll tell you something. It's pretty depressing. I don't know why anybody would get in this field because if you look at the pictures in this book, I mean, I wouldn't be able to go home at night and look at this stuff, and I wouldn't be able to sleep. I would carry it with me for days. But Gebhardt has a very nice thing in the very beginning of his book. The very first page, it has a quote from the fifth commandment of the Holy Bible. It says, "Thou shalt not kill." And then he does his little thing about an oath about a homicide investigator, why their work is so important. And he says at the very end, he says, "And remember, we work for God." And I think it's so nice that he puts that in there, because it is important to have homicide investigators that are really professionals and take their job seriously, because they are doing the work for God. And I'm really impressed by Gebhardt's book, but sometimes you have to have a book like this to learn about things like gunshot residue and, what should be and shouldn't be at a crime scene, what's missing at a crime scene that should be there. I mean, it's a really excellent book, and that's why they use it at all the police academies.
And you talk about those photos. If you look at the Netflix documentary of the death of Danny Casolaro, they show the crime scene in that bathroom, which is blood splattered all over the walls and the side of the tub, and the dark blood in the tub. It just is horrific. But Mr. Hugh Turley, we are out of time. Check out Murder of Vince Foster, The Assassination of James Forrestal, the FBI cover-up.com. Go back and look at all the archives we've done with Hugh Turley about the
Thomas Merton's murder.
The Thomas Merton stuff.
Well, anytime you got a homicide case, you can call me up and consult with me. I'm not a homicide investigator, but I've learned quite a bit about it over the years, what to look for, and it's been fun.
Well, I'm definitely going to consult.
I always enjoy talking to you.
Oh, no, me too, yeah. If I ever have a missing rabbit case, I know right where to look, right in your hat. Okay, my friend.
Well, that's why I named my rabbit Stu, so I wouldn't starve.
Okay, that's a good one, man. Thank you so much, Hugh Turley.
Okay, bye.
Good night, sir.